A day before our annual trip, my son texted, "Don't come to the lake house. My wife's parents need the master suite. You can watch the dogs at home." I didn't argue. I called a developer and sold the land for cash that afternoon. When they pulled up with their luggage the house, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I was folding Barrett's old t-shirts when my phone buzzed. 38 years of being his mother, and I still kept some of his clothes in my linen closet. The faded baseball shirts from high school, a college sweatshirt with a small tear in the sleeve that I'd offered to mend a dozen times. He never wanted them back, but I couldn't bring myself to donate them either. The message appeared on my screen like a slap across the face. "Stay home and watch the dogs. Sarah's parents need the master suite. We'll handle everything this year." I read it 3 times before the words actually sank in. My hands started trembling, and I had to sit down on my bed. The same bed where Robert and I used to plan those lake house weekends, where we'd lie awake excited like children on Christmas Eve, talking about all the memories we'd make with our family. Barrett was talking about our annual 4th of July weekend. 34 years we'd been going to that lake house. 34 years of tradition, of family barbecues, of watching fireworks reflect on the water while 3 generations sat together on the dock Robert built with his own hands. Watch the dogs. He wanted me to stay home and watch the dogs while his in-laws enjoyed the master bedroom that I'd decorated myself. The bedroom where Robert and I had spent our last anniversary before the heart attack took him. The bedroom with the windows facing east so we could watch the sunrise over the water every morning. I called him immediately. My fingers shook as I pressed his number, muscle memory from 15 years of worry every time he didn't answer right away. "Hi, Mom." His voice was distant, distracted. I could hear Sarah laughing in the background, probably at something on her phone. She was always on that phone. "Barrett, honey, I just got your message. I think there might be some confusion." "No confusion, Mom. Sarah's parents are coming, and you know how her dad's back is. He needs the good bed. The guest room would be too uncomfortable for them." The guest room. He was talking about the guest room like I was a guest in my own family tradition. Like I was some distant relative who should be grateful for whatever corner was left over. "But Barrett, this is our weekend. Our family weekend. We've been planning this since Easter. It's still family weekend. Maybe it would be better if you sat this one out. Sarah's been really stressed about hosting her parents, and you know how she gets." Yes, I knew exactly how Sarah got. I'd watched her manipulate my son for 9 years, slowly cutting away pieces of him until I barely recognized the boy who used to call me every Sunday just to chat. The boy who used to bring me flowers on Mother's Day, not because he had to, but because he wanted to see me smile. "Barrett, I bought all the groceries yesterday. They're sitting in my refrigerator right now. I made my famous potato salad, the one your father always loved. I picked up those expensive steaks you like." Silence. Then, quietly, "Maybe you could drop them off tomorrow morning? Before we get there?" Drop them off. Like a delivery service. Like hired help. "I've been organizing this weekend for 34 years, Barrett, since you were 4 years old. Since before Sarah was even in your life." "Mom, don't make this about Sarah. This is just what works best for everyone." Everyone except me. But I didn't say that. I'd learned over the years that pointing out my own needs only seemed to annoy him more. "What about tradition? What about the photo we always take on the dock? We have 33 years of those photos, Barrett. 33 years of our family together in that same spot. We can take a photo next year." Next year. As if next year was promised. As if I'd still be welcome next year. Or if there would even be a next year for us. I was 62 years old. How many next years did I realistically have left with my son? "I don't understand this, Barrett. Help me understand how we went from planning our weekend together to me being uninvited from my own family tradition." Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear Sarah's voice in the background, sharp and impatient, though I couldn't make out the words. Look, Mom, I have to go. Sarah needs help with something. Just stay home this weekend, okay? Rest, relax. Take care of Buddy and Sasha for us. They love you. The dogs loved me. At least there was that. He hung up before I could respond. I sat there holding the phone, staring at the blank screen, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it couldn't beat properly. I walked to my kitchen and stared at the bags of groceries lined up on my counter. $237 worth of food, Barrett's favorite beer, the expensive cheese Sarah pretended to like, fresh corn for the barbecue, everything I'd carefully selected to make our weekend perfect. On my refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a little lake house, was this year's calendar. I'd marked the 4th of July weekend in bright red ink months ago. Lake House, family time, written in my careful handwriting. The same handwriting that used to fill out Barrett's school forms, sign his permission slips, write encouraging notes for his lunchbox. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my photos. Last year's 4th of July. There we were on the dock, Barrett and Sarah and me. Barrett looked tired, but he was smiling. Sarah looked bored, but she was there. I looked happy, genuinely happy, because for that one moment, it felt like we were still a family. The photo from 2 years ago showed a different story. Barrett's smile was more forced. Sarah was checking her phone even in the picture. But we were together. We were trying. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, right after Robert died. Barrett had his arm around me in that one, holding me up during my first holiday season without his father. He'd been so gentle with me then, so protective. When had that changed? When had I become the burden instead of the beloved? I set my phone down and walked to the window that faces the street. From here, I could see Mrs. Henderson next door watering her roses. She'd lost her husband 2 years after I lost Robert. We'd become friends in the way that widows do, bonding over the particular loneliness of sleeping in beds that used to be shared. Mrs. Henderson had 3 daughters. All 3 called her every week. All 3 included her in their holiday plans. She spent Christmas bouncing between houses, complaining good-naturedly about being too busy to rest. I used to envy her, though I tried not to let it show. Now I wondered what she would think if she knew that my only child had just uninvited me from the family tradition I'd spent 34 years building. I turned away from the window and found myself staring at the empty picture frame on my mantel. Every year, I put the new lake house photo in that frame. It was already waiting for this year's picture, the one that apparently wouldn't include me. My phone buzzed again. For a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe Barrett had changed his mind. Maybe he'd realized how cruel his message had been. It was Sarah. Hi, Marion. Just wanted to confirm you're okay with watching Buddy and Sasha this weekend. They've been so anxious lately, and you're so good with them. We really appreciate it. She was thanking me for being demoted to dog sitter. She was expressing gratitude for my humiliation. I didn't respond. I couldn't trust myself to type anything that wouldn't make things worse. Instead, I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the small suitcase I'd already packed for the weekend. 3 days' worth of clothes, carefully chosen. My comfortable jeans for morning coffee on the deck. The sundress Robert always said brought out my eyes. My swimsuit, because even at 62 I still loved floating in that lake, feeling weightless and free. I unpacked everything slowly, hanging each item back in my closet like I was putting away pieces of a dream I'd been foolish to believe in. The lake house had been our sanctuary. After Robert died, it became my lifeline. The place where I still felt connected to the family we used to be. The place where Barrett still laughed at my stories, where Sarah occasionally let her guard down enough to seem almost human. Now they wanted to take even that away from me. I sat on the edge of my bed and realized something that made my stomach clench with a cold, hard certainty. This wasn't about Sarah's parents. This wasn't about comfort or convenience. This was about erasing me. Barrett wasn't just uninviting me from one weekend. He was testing the waters, seeing how easily he could push me out of our family traditions. seeing if I'd fight back, or if I'd simply accept whatever scraps of attention he was willing to throw my way. The worst part was, I probably would have accepted it. I probably would have shown up tomorrow morning with my bags of groceries, handed them over with a smile, and driven home to spend the holiday weekend alone with 2 dogs who weren't even mine. I probably would have done exactly what he expected me to do. But as I sat there in the growing darkness of my bedroom, something inside me shifted, a small, hard kernel of anger that I hadn't felt in years. Not the quick flash of irritation that comes and goes, but something deeper. Something that tasted like self-respect. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number Helen Henderson had given me last month. The developer who'd been trying to buy properties in the Lake District. The one she'd mentioned was paying cash, closing quickly. Before I could change my mind, I pressed call. A man answered on the second ring. Davidson Development. This is Mike. Hello, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I have a lake property I'd like to sell immediately. Mike Davidson arrived at my house 43 minutes after I called him. I'd spent those minutes pacing my living room, second-guessing myself with every step. What was I doing? This was insane. You don't sell a lake house worth $750,000 because your feelings got hurt. But then, I'd catch sight of Barrett's old school photos lining my hallway, and the anger would surge back. 22 years of parent-teacher conferences I'd attended alone after Robert died. 22 years of being both mother and father, cheerleader and disciplinarian. 22 years of putting Barrett first, only to be told I should stay home and watch the dogs. Mike was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of actual work rather than just office deals. He sat across from my kitchen table, spreading out papers while I made coffee with hands that still trembled slightly. Mrs. Patterson, I have to ask, are you sure about this? Waterfront property like yours, it's usually a family legacy kind of thing. I set his coffee cup down harder than necessary. It was supposed to be. He glanced up at something in my voice. Trouble with the family? You could say that. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd been scrolling through earlier. 34 years of 4th of July weekends. 34 years of making that place the center of our family's world. Mike studied the photos, his expression softening as he took in decades of smiling faces, birthday parties, graduation celebrations. Beautiful property. Beautiful family. What changed? I almost laughed, but it would have sounded bitter. My son got married. That wasn't fair to Barrett, and I knew it even as I said it. The changes had been gradual, so slow I'd barely noticed them happening. Like watching someone you love disappear piece by piece, until one day you wake up and realize they're a stranger wearing a familiar face. The house was my husband's dream, I found myself saying. Mike had that kind of face that made you want to explain things, to make him understand this wasn't just about money. Robert worked construction for 27 years. Good, honest work, but hard on the body. He used to drive by lakefront properties on weekends, especially this one piece of land that had been in the same family for generations. I got up and pulled a photo album from my bookshelf. The wedding album I'd put together for Barrett and Sarah, full of pictures they'd probably never looked at. There, tucked in the back, was the photo I wanted. Robert standing in front of a for sale sign, grinning like he'd won the lottery. He'd been setting aside money for 15 years. $20 here, $50 there. Never told me about it until Barrett graduated college. Then one day he comes home and says, Marion, pack a bag. We're going to look at our retirement. Mike studied the photo. He looks happy. He was. We drove up there on a Saturday morning in October. The leaves were changing and the lake was like glass. The property had this old cabin on it, nothing fancy. But Robert walked around it like he was touring a palace. He kept saying, Can you see it, Marion? Can you see our family here? I could still remember the way his eyes lit up as he described his vision. The deck he wanted to build. The fire pit for evening conversations. The dock where he'd teach Barrett's future children to fish, the way his own father had taught him. We couldn't afford it, Not even close. But Robert had a gift for seeing possibilities where other people saw problems. The cabin needed work, major work. The septic system was ancient. The well pump was dying. Most buyers would have run away. But not Robert. Robert saw a project. Something he could pour his love into, build with his own hands. He made an offer $50,000 below asking price, contingent on him doing all the repairs himself. The sellers thought he was crazy, but they were desperate. It had been on the market for 2 years. Mike nodded, understanding the dynamics of a stalled sale. And he pulled it off? Spent every weekend for 3 years driving up there. Barrett and I would pack lunches and make it a family adventure. Barrett was 7 when we bought it, 10 when Robert finished the renovations. Those were some of the best years of our lives. I flipped through more photos. Barrett helping his father measure boards, his little hands trying to hold a level steady. Barrett and Robert covered in sawdust, grinning at the camera with identical smiles. Barrett learning to hammer nails, tongue sticking out in concentration. Robert taught Barrett everything on that property. How to fix a leaky faucet, how to read the weather by watching the lake, how to gut a fish without making a mess. But more than that, he taught him about taking care of something you love, about building something that would last. Sounds like Barrett learned those lessons well. I closed the album. I thought he had. Mike waited while I refilled our coffee cups. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Henderson's grandchildren playing in her backyard, their laughter drifting through my kitchen window. Normal family sounds, the kind of sounds that used to fill my lake house every holiday weekend. Robert died 15 years ago, I continued. Heart attack at 47. One day he was planning to retire early so we could spend more time at the lake. The next day, Barrett and I were planning his funeral. I'm sorry. Barrett was 25 then, old enough to understand what we were losing, but still young enough to need his father. That lake house became sacred to us after Robert died. It was where we felt closest to him, where we could still hear his voice in the wind through the trees. I showed Mike another photo. Barrett at 26, standing on the dock Robert had built, holding his father's fishing tackle box. He used to sit out there for hours, using Robert's old lures, convinced he could feel his dad's presence in the water. He'd tell me about conversations he'd had with Robert while he was fishing. Dreams where Robert gave him advice about work, about life, about becoming the man he was meant to be. What happened to change that? Sarah. The name came out sharper than I intended. Don't misunderstand me. Sarah isn't evil, she's just focused. She has very specific ideas about what kind of life she wants, and a rustic lake house didn't fit the image. Mike leaned back in his chair. She wanted him to sell it? She never said that directly. Sarah's too smart for that. She just started making it difficult to go. There was always something, a work event she couldn't miss, plans with her friends that couldn't be changed, a migraine that made her too sick to travel. Barrett started going up alone, but it wasn't the same. The house was designed for family, for gathering. One person rattling around in all that space just felt lonely. I got up and walked to the window again. Mrs. Henderson was helping one of her grandsons with a bicycle, steadying the seat while he pedaled in wobbly circles. The kind of scene I'd imagined playing out at my lake house someday, with Barrett's children. Then Sarah got pregnant. The words came out quietly. For 5 months, I thought everything would change. I started planning the nursery I'd set up in the lake house guest room. I bought a crib that would fit in the space by the window, where the baby could watch the sunrise. I imagined teaching my grandchild to swim in that lake, the way Robert had taught Barrett. Mike's silence felt gentle, inviting me to continue. Sarah miscarried at 22 weeks. We were all devastated but Barrett. It broke something in him. He stopped going to the lake house entirely. Said it hurt too much to be there, with all those empty rooms that were supposed to be filled with family. But you kept going. I had to. It was the only place I still felt like Robert's wife instead of his widow. The only place where Barrett's childhood wasn't just a memory. I started going up by myself, maintaining the property, keeping it ready for when Barrett was ready to come back. I pulled out my phone and showed Mike the photos from recent years. Me alone on the dock, raising a coffee cup in a solitary toast. Me tending the garden Robert had planted. Me sitting by the fire pit, surrounded by empty chairs. Sarah eventually agreed to start coming again, but only for special occasions. Only when it served some purpose for her. She'd invite her friends up for girls' weekends, or suggest we host Barrett's work colleagues for corporate retreats. She turned my sanctuary into a networking opportunity. That must have been hard to watch. I told myself it was worth it if it meant Barrett was using the house again. If it meant we were still gathering as a family, even if the gatherings felt different. Even if Sarah spent most of her time on her phone or complaining about the Wi-Fi signal, or suggesting improvements that would have destroyed everything Robert built with his hands. Mike gathered his papers and pulled out a contract. "Mrs. Patterson, I can have cash in your account by tomorrow afternoon. $700,000, as is, no inspections, no contingencies. But once you sign this, there's no going back. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want to do?" I looked around my kitchen, at the reminders of the life I'd built around being Barrett's mother. The refrigerator covered with his old artwork, the cookbook filled with his favorite recipes, the calendar marking every important date in his life like a shrine to motherhood. Then I thought about his text message. "Stay home and watch the dogs." 34 years of tradition, dismissed in a single sentence. 34 years of love, reduced to dog-sitting duties. "How quickly can your crews clear the property?" Mike checked his phone. "If you sign today, we could have demo crews there by Monday morning. The old cabin will be gone by Wednesday." I picked up the pen, my hand steady now for the first time since Barrett's message had shattered my afternoon. Where do I sign? I didn't sleep Thursday night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Robert's face the day we first walked through that lake house. The way he'd run his hands along the rough cabin walls like he was blessing them. The way he'd stood on the shore and said, "This is where our grandchildren will learn to swim, Marion. This is where our family will grow old together." By Friday morning, I'd convinced myself I'd made a terrible mistake. $700,000 in my checking account felt like blood money. I'd betrayed Robert's memory, destroyed Barrett's inheritance, ruined everything over a moment of wounded pride. I was reaching for my phone to call Mike Davidson, to beg him to tear up the contract, when my doorbell rang. Mrs. Henderson stood on my porch holding a manila envelope, her face grim in a way that made my stomach clench. "Marion, honey, I didn't want to show you this, but I think you need to see it." She followed me into the kitchen and spread photos across my table. Color printouts from Facebook, timestamp dates stretching back months. My breath caught in my throat. Barrett and Sarah at my lake house, but not alone. "My niece Emma lives in town now, remember? She's been seeing that boy who works at the marina. They've been talking about all the parties up at your place." I picked up the first photo with shaking hands. Barrett and Sarah with 6 other couples, all of them holding drinks, standing on my deck like they owned it. Sarah was wearing a designer bikini I'd never seen before, posed like she was in a magazine spread. The timestamp read 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, Barrett had called me to cancel our monthly dinner because he was swamped at work. "Emma said they've been happening most weekends since spring," Mrs. Henderson continued gently. "She thought you knew. She thought you were okay with it." I flipped through more photos, Barrett grilling steaks on the barbecue Robert built. Sarah and her friends lounging on the furniture I'd carefully chosen and maintained. Group shots around the fire pit, everyone laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. In every single photo, my son looked happier than I'd seen him in years. "This one's from Memorial Day weekend," Mrs. Henderson said, pointing to a photo that made my vision blur with rage. Sarah was holding a champagne glass, standing in front of the hand-carved welcome sign I'd commissioned after Robert died. The one that read, "Patterson Family Lake House, Eastern 2010, where love lives on." but someone had taped a piece of paper over Patterson family. Now it read, Barrett and Sarah's Lake House. They'd erased me. Literally covered up my family name and replaced it with their own. Marion, are you okay? You've gone completely white. I couldn't speak. I kept staring at that covered sign, at the casual cruelty of it. They hadn't just excluded me from their parties. They'd rewritten history, pretending the house belonged to them alone. I flipped to the next photo and felt something crack in my chest. Barrett was standing exactly where Robert used to stand when he'd call us in for dinner, arms spread wide in the same gesture his father used to make. But instead of calling for family, he was posing for Sarah's camera, mugging like a college kid at spring break. The next photo showed Sarah's friends exploring the house. My house, the master bedroom where I'd grieved Robert's death. The guest room where I'd dreamed of rocking Barrett's babies. The kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals, where every pot and pan and coffee mug held memories of the family I'd thought we were. Emma said Sarah told everyone it was their family's vacation house, Mrs. Henderson said quietly. She never mentioned you at all. Their family's vacation house, not our family, theirs. I found my voice, though it came out hoarse and strange. How long have you known about this? Emma mentioned it a few weeks ago, but I didn't think much of it. Young people have different ways of doing things. I thought maybe you'd given them permission to use the house more freely. More freely. As if I'd ever restricted their access to a place I'd maintained entirely for their benefit. But when you told me yesterday about Barrett uninviting you from this weekend, about how he wanted you to watch the dogs. Mrs. Henderson shook her head. I realized Emma's stories didn't match what you were telling me, so I asked her to show me the photos. I stared at a picture of Sarah raising a toast, surrounded by friends I'd never met, in the living room where Robert and I used to play cards on rainy afternoons. The caption underneath read, Living our best lake life. So grateful for this perfect escape. Perfect escape? From what? From me? There's more, Mrs. Henderson said reluctantly. She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot of a text conversation. Emma's boyfriend sent this to her yesterday. The messages were between two people I didn't recognize, talking about this weekend's plans. Barrett said his mom finally won't be there this time. Thank God. Sarah said she's been trying to figure out how to get rid of her all summer. What's the deal with that? It's not even the mom's house anymore, right? I guess technically it is, but Sarah said Barrett's working on that. Something about getting her to sign it over or whatever. The phone slipped from my numb fingers. Getting me to sign it over. Barrett hadn't been gradually pulling away from me. He'd been systematically pushing me out of the lake house so he and Sarah could claim it as their own. The canceled dinners, the shortened visits, the excuses about being too busy to come up for weekends. It had all been calculated. While I'd been desperately trying to hold our family together, Barrett had been planning to take the house away from me entirely. Marion? Mrs. Henderson's voice seemed to come from very far away. Marion, you need to sit down. I was already sitting, but I felt like I was falling. 34 years of believing my son loved me. 34 years of sacrificing for him, working extra shifts to pay for the house maintenance, skipping my own needs to make sure he always had a place to escape to. And he'd been plotting to steal it from me. Not just use it without permission. Steal it. My phone buzzed. A text from Barrett. Change of plans. We're heading up tonight instead of tomorrow. Can you drop off those groceries by 6? And maybe throw in some extra beer? Sarah's parents drink more than I remembered. LOL. The casualness of it. The assumption that I'd just comply. The laughing emoji like this was all some light-hearted family joke. It hit me like a physical blow. He had no idea I'd discovered their secret parties. No idea I knew about Sarah's friends mocking me behind my back. No idea that Emma's boyfriend had exposed their plan to manipulate me into signing over the house. Barrett thought he was dealing with the same pushover mother who'd been enabling his selfishness for years. The mother who'd accepted every excuse, every cancellation, every gradual erosion of respect without fighting back. But that mother was gone. I stood up so abruptly that my chair fell backward. Mrs. Henderson jumped, alarmed by the sudden movement. "Marian, what are you thinking?" I was thinking about Robert building that dock board by board. I was thinking about Barrett as a 7-year-old, hammer in his tiny hands, so eager to help his father create something beautiful. I was thinking about all the love and hope and dreams that had gone into that house, now reduced to a party venue for people who'd never even met the man who built it. I was thinking about Sarah covering up my family name like I was something to be ashamed of. "I need to make a phone call," I said, my voice deadly calm. I dialed Mike Davidson's number. He answered immediately, like he'd been expecting to hear from me. "Mrs. Patterson? Having second thoughts?" "Actually, I have a question about timing. How quickly can you get those demolition crews to the property?" "Well, we were planning to start Monday, but if you need it faster." "I need them there tomorrow, Saturday morning, early." A pause. "That's going to cost extra for weekend crews." "I don't care what it costs." Another pause. "May I ask why the rush?" I looked at the photos scattered across my kitchen table. Barrett's smiling face in every single one, celebrating in the house his father had built while systematically erasing me from the story. "Let's just say I want to surprise my family." I hung up and turned to Mrs. Henderson, who was staring at me with a mixture of concern and admiration. "You're really going to do this?" I thought about Barrett's text message, about him ordering me to deliver groceries like hired help, while he and his wife entertained her parents in the master bedroom that still smelled like Robert's aftershave. I thought about Sarah's friends laughing about finally getting rid of me. I thought about the covered sign, my family name hidden like something shameful. "Helen," I said, and my voice was steadier than it had been in years. "Would you like to drive up to the lake with me tomorrow morning? I think you'd enjoy the show." Her eyes lit up with something that looked suspiciously like anticipation. "What time should I be ready?" I checked my watch. Barrett would be arriving at the house in approximately 18 hours, expecting to find his usual playground waiting for him. Instead, he was going to find something very different. 7 a.m., I said. "And bring your camera. I have a feeling this is going to be a weekend none of us will ever forget." The sound of construction equipment echoed across the lake like thunder. I sat in my car at the end of the long driveway, Mrs. Henderson beside me, watching 3 bulldozers tear into the house Robert had rebuilt with his own hands. The morning air was thick with dust and the smell of diesel fuel, but underneath it all, I caught the faint scent of the wild roses Robert had planted along the property line. They would be gone by noon, too. "Are you sure about this, Marian?" Mrs. Henderson asked for the 3rd time, though her voice held more excitement than concern. "Once it's down forever." I watched a section of the front porch collapse, taking with it the swing where Barrett used to read comic books on lazy summer afternoons. "It's been gone for a while, Helen. I'm just making it official." Mike Davidson's crew had arrived at 6:30, exactly as promised. 3 bulldozers, a demolition team, and enough equipment to level the house completely by Sunday night. The extra cost for weekend work had been worth every penny to see the foreman's confused expression when I'd insisted they start with the welcome sign. The same sign Sarah had covered with her own name was now buried under a pile of splintered wood and torn metal. My phone had been buzzing constantly since 7 a.m. First Barrett, then Sarah, then Barrett again. I'd ignored every call, every frantic text message. Let them wonder, let them panic, let them feel, for once, what it was like to have something precious ripped away without warning. "There," Mrs. Henderson said, pointing toward the main road. "Is that them?" Barrett's silver BMW appeared through the trees, moving fast enough to send gravel spraying behind it. Even from a distance, I could see the car swerving slightly as the driver tried to process what they were seeing. The car skidded to a stop 50 feet from the construction zone. Barrett jumped out so quickly he left his door hanging open, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Sarah emerged more slowly from the passenger side, her designer sunglasses hiding her eyes but not the rigid set of her jaw. I rolled down my window to hear better. "What the hell is happening here?" Barrett's voice carried across the noise of the machinery, high and strained with panic. Mike Davidson approached them, clipboard in hand, his expression professionally neutral. "You folks need to stay back behind the safety line. This is an active demolition site." "Demolition?" Sarah's voice cracked on the word. "There must be some mistake. This is our house. We're supposed to be here this weekend." "No mistake, ma'am. Property was sold yesterday. New owners wanted immediate clearing for development." Barrett grabbed Mike's arm, and for a moment I thought my son might actually strike him. "Sold? This house can't be sold. My mother owns this property, and she would never—" He stopped mid-sentence, his face going white as understanding began to dawn. Sarah ripped off her sunglasses, revealing eyes wild with rage and disbelief. "Where is she? Where's Marion?" Mrs. Henderson nudged me. "Here we go." I got out of my car and walked toward them, taking my time. With each step, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete control of a situation involving my son. For once, Barrett was the one scrambling to understand. For once, he was the one with no power to manipulate the outcome. "Mom!" Barrett rushed toward me, his face desperate. "Mom, what's happening? Please tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding." I stopped just outside the safety perimeter, close enough to see the fear in his eyes, but far enough away that the construction noise would force him to really listen. "No misunderstanding, Barrett. I sold the house." "You what?" Sarah's shriek pierced through the rumble of machinery. "You can't sell this house. We have plans. We have people coming." "Yes, I heard about your plans." I pulled out my phone and showed them the Facebook photos Mrs. Henderson had printed. "Quite the party you had last month, and the month before that, and apparently every weekend since spring." Barrett's face cycled through confusion, recognition, and finally something that might have been shame. "Mom, I can explain." "Can you explain this?" I showed him the photo of the covered welcome sign. "Can you explain why Sarah felt the need to hide our family name?" Sarah stepped forward, her composure cracking completely. We were just having some friends over. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. Friends I'd never met. In a house you told them belonged to you." I kept my voice level, almost conversational. "Tell me, Sarah, when exactly were you planning to have Barrett convince me to sign the deed over to you?" The question hit like a slap. Barrett actually staggered backward. Who told you that?" "Does it matter? The point is, while I was buying groceries for our family weekend, you two were plotting to steal my home." "It's not stealing." Sarah's voice rose to nearly a scream. "Barrett deserves that house. You're just a bitter old woman who can't let go." Mrs. Henderson gasped audibly from behind me, but I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Finally, Sarah was showing her true face. "You're right," I said calmly. "Barrett does deserve a lake house. He should build one himself, with his own money, the way his father built this one. The way real men provide for their families." Barrett flinched like I'd struck him. "Mom, please, we can work this out. Whatever you want, whatever you need." What I needed was respect. The words came out harder than I'd intended. What I needed was to be treated like family instead of like hired help. What I needed was for my son to defend me when his wife called me a bitter old woman. "I never," Barrett started, but I cut him off. "You stood there and let her say it, just like you've stood there and let her disrespect me for 9 years. Just like you stood there and let her erase our family name from the sign your father's memory built." Sarah stepped between us, her face twisted with fury. "Robert's dead, Marion. He's been dead for 15 years. This obsession with his memory is pathetic." The words hung in the air like smoke. Even the construction crew seemed to pause for a moment, sensing the violence of what had just been said. Barrett's face went gray. "Sarah, don't—" "No, Barrett. Someone needs to say it. Your mother has been holding this family hostage with a dead man's ghost for years. We can't move forward. We can't make our own memories. We can't even use our own property without her hovering around like some kind of sad, desperate widow. I stepped closer to Sarah, close enough to see the spittle at the corners of her mouth, the rage that had been building behind her perfect facade for years. You're absolutely right, Sarah. Robert is dead, but his love for this family was real. His sacrifice to build this place was real, and his son's respect for that sacrifice used to be real too. I turned to Barrett, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. Your father spent 3 years of his life rebuilding this house. He worked every weekend, came home exhausted and covered in sawdust because he wanted to give you something permanent, something that would last. He dreamed of teaching your children to fish off that dock, the way he taught you. Barrett's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't finished. He never got to meet those grandchildren. He never got to see you become a man. But he believed you would honor what he built here. He believed you understood the difference between earning something and taking it. I did understand, Barrett whispered. I do understand. No, you don't. I shook my head sadly. If you understood, you wouldn't have plotted to steal this place from me. If you understood, you wouldn't have let your wife mock your father's memory. If you understood, you would have built something of your own instead of trying to take mine. Sarah laughed, a harsh sound that cut through everything else. Built something of his own? With what money? Barrett can barely afford his car payments, much less buy lakefront property. The admission hung between us like a confession. Barrett's financial struggles, the debt I suspected but had never asked about, the reason they needed my house instead of buying their own. Is that true, Barrett? I asked quietly. He couldn't meet my eyes. Things have been tight lately. Sarah's spending, my job market, the house payments. So you thought you'd solve your money problems by stealing from your mother. It wasn't stealing. He exploded finally. You're going to die someday anyway. I'm your only child. That house should come to me. The words echoed across the construction site. Should come to him. Like my love, my sacrifice, my years of maintenance and care meant nothing. Like I was just an inconvenient obstacle between him and his inheritance. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and realized I was seeing a stranger. The little boy who'd helped his father build this place was gone, replaced by a weak, greedy man who felt entitled to things he'd never earned. You're right, Barrett. Someday I will die. And when that day comes, you'll inherit whatever I choose to leave you. I gestured toward the demolition site, where the last wall of the house was coming down in a shower of dust and memories. Today isn't that day, and this isn't that house. Sarah grabbed Barrett's arm, her face desperate now instead of angry. Do something. Stop them. This is our future they're destroying. But Barrett just stood there, watching bulldozers bury 34 years of family history under piles of debris. His face was blank, shocked, like he was seeing the consequences of his choices for the first time. The bulldozers will be finished by tomorrow evening, I said, turning to walk back to my car. I'll have the property cleaned up and ready for the developers by Monday morning. Where are we supposed to go? Sarah called after me. We told people we'd be here. We have nowhere else. I stopped and looked back at them one last time. Barrett and Sarah, standing in the ruins of everything Robert had built, everything I had maintained, everything they had taken for granted. I guess you'll have to figure that out the same way you plan to figure out how to steal my house, I said. Without me. As I walked away, I heard Sarah screaming at Barrett, blaming him for losing control of his mother, for not handling the situation better, for not being man enough to prevent this disaster. I heard none of it from Barrett in response. Mrs. Henderson was waiting in the car, practically vibrating with excitement. Marion, that was incredible. I've never seen anything like it. I got into the driver's seat and started the engine, pulling away from the demolition site without looking back. In my rearview mirror, I could see Barrett and Sarah still standing there, surrounded by the debris of their entitled expectations. "How do you feel?" Mrs. Henderson asked as we drove toward town. I considered the question as we passed the marina where Robert used to buy bait, the ice cream stand where Barrett had celebrated his first successful fishing trip, the general store where 3 generations of my family had bought supplies for countless lake weekends. All of it was ending. All of it was gone. But for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't the one being left behind. "Free," I said finally. "I feel free." 3 months after the demolition, I was sitting in a cafe in Portland, Oregon, watching the rain streak down the window while I waited for my real estate agent. Not the rain I was used to back home, but something gentler, more purposeful. Everything about this city felt purposeful, from the way people walked with intention down the tree-lined streets to the way conversations flowed in coffee shops without the underlying tension I'd grown accustomed to. My phone buzzed with another call from Barrett, the 7th one this week. I let it go to voicemail, just like all the others. There would be time to deal with Barrett later, when I was ready, when I had built something strong enough to withstand whatever manipulation he was preparing. "Mrs. Patterson?" A woman with kind eyes and silver hair approached my table. "I'm Linda Chen. Are you ready to see your new home?" I stood up, smoothing down the jacket I'd bought last week. Nothing fancy, but new. Everything about my wardrobe was new now. After Barrett's confrontation at the lake, I donated most of my old clothes to charity. All those careful, conservative outfits chosen to avoid drawing attention, to avoid giving anyone a reason to criticize the grieving widow, the devoted mother who never quite measured up. The woman looking back at me from dressing room mirrors now was someone I barely recognized. Confident, purposeful, free. "I'm ready," I told Linda, and meant it completely. The house was a 15-minute walk from the cafe, in a neighborhood full of craftsman homes and established gardens. Nothing like the lake house Robert had built, nothing like the suburban prison I'd maintained for 38 years. This was something entirely mine. "Built in 1922, Linda explained as we walked up the front steps. "The previous owner was an artist. She lived here for 47 years before moving to assisted living." The front door opened onto hardwood floors that gleamed in the afternoon light. Large windows, built-in bookshelves, a fireplace that actually worked instead of just providing decoration. The kind of house where people lived intentionally, where every room had a purpose beyond just filling space. "The kitchen was updated 5 years ago," Linda continued, leading me through rooms that felt like possibilities instead of obligations. "All the appliances are included." I ran my hands along the granite countertops, imagining cooking meals for one without guilt. No more preparing elaborate dinners that went unappreciated. No more buying Barrett's favorite foods in case he decided to visit. No more organizing my entire life around someone else's unpredictable needs. "There's something else I think you'll love," Linda said, opening a door I hadn't noticed. The room beyond was flooded with natural light from a wall of windows facing north. Built-in easels lined one wall. Storage cabinets filled another, a workspace designed for creation, for pursuing something meaningful instead of just maintaining what already existed. "The previous owner was a painter," Linda explained. "She said this room gets the most beautiful light in the afternoons." I stood in the center of the studio, feeling something I hadn't experienced since Robert died. Possibility. Not the careful, tentative hope of maybe someday, but the immediate electric sense that my life could be different starting right now. "I'll take it," I said without hesitation. Linda blinked, clearly not expecting such a quick decision. "Don't you want to think about it? Discuss it with your family?" "There's no family to discuss it with," I said, and the words didn't sting anymore. They were simply fact, no more painful than saying the sky was blue or the rain was wet. We spent the next hour filling out paperwork. Purchase price, $425,000. Down payment, $300,000 in cash. No mortgage, no monthly payments, no financial obligations to anyone but myself. When Linda asked about my plans for the property, I found myself talking about things I'd never said out loud before. About the pottery class I'd always wanted to take. About the garden I wanted to grow, focused on beauty instead of practicality. About the books I wanted to read without interruption, the movies I wanted to watch without considering whether someone else would enjoy them. "It sounds like you're starting a whole new chapter," Linda said as we shook hands on the deal. "More like a whole new book," I replied. That evening, I called Mrs. Henderson from my hotel room. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright with anticipation. "Marian, how's Oregon treating you?" "I bought a house today." Silence, then a delighted gasp. "You what? Tell me everything." I described the craftsman home, the artist's studio, the neighborhood full of people who minded their own business in the best possible way. As I talked, I realized I hadn't felt this excited about anything in years, maybe decades. "It sounds perfect for you," Mrs. Henderson said. "When do you move in?" "Next month. I'm having everything shipped from storage." I'd put most of my belongings in a storage unit after selling my house in Sacramento. Another decision that had shocked Barrett, though he'd been too busy dealing with his own financial crisis to protest much. "And Barrett? Have you talked to him?" I looked out my hotel window at the Portland skyline, lights beginning to twinkle as evening settled over the city. "He's been calling. I'm not ready to answer yet." "You don't have to be ready on anyone else's timeline, honey. Take all the time you need." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and scrolled through the photos I'd taken today. The empty studio, waiting for whatever I decided to create. The kitchen where I'd cook meals based on what I wanted to eat, not what someone else expected. The living room where I could arrange furniture for my own comfort instead of optimizing for visitors who rarely came. My phone buzzed with a text message. Not from Barrett this time, but from an unknown number. "Hi, Mrs. Patterson. This is Emma Henderson, Helen's niece. She gave me your number and said you might be interested in some information about Barrett and Sarah." I stared at the message for a long moment. Emma, the young woman whose boyfriend had exposed Barrett and Sarah's plan to steal my house. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to focus on moving forward instead of looking backward. But a larger part needed to know. "What kind of information?" I typed back. The response came immediately. "Sarah left Barrett 3 weeks ago. Took half of everything and moved back to her parents' house. Barrett's been asking around town about you, trying to find out where you went." I set the phone down and walked to the window again. Sarah had abandoned Barrett the moment their scheme fell apart. Of course she had. Without my lake house to offer her friends, without the prospect of inheriting valuable property, Barrett had nothing to offer her except debt and disappointment. My phone buzzed again. "He's been telling people you had some kind of breakdown, that the stress of being a widow made you do crazy things. Thought you should know what story he's spreading." A breakdown. Barrett was rewriting history again, casting me as the unstable one while he played the long-suffering son dealing with his mentally ill mother. The same pattern he'd learned from Sarah, the same refusal to accept responsibility for his own choices. I typed back, "Thank you for letting me know." Then I blocked the number. Barrett's version of events didn't matter anymore. Let him tell whatever stories helped him sleep at night. Let him blame his mother for his failed marriage, his financial problems, his inability to build anything lasting on his own. The truth was simpler and more devastating than any lie he could construct. He had revealed himself to be someone I no longer recognized as my son. I spent the next week exploring Portland, learning the rhythms of a city that felt like home in ways I'd never expected. Coffee shops where people worked on laptops or read books without constantly checking their phones. Bookstores with knowledgeable staff who made recommendations based on actual conversation instead of just pushing bestsellers. Galleries showing work by local artists, people who'd chosen to create something beautiful instead of just consuming what others had made. On Thursday, I signed up for a pottery class at a studio 3 blocks from my new house. The instructor was a woman about my age who'd started making ceramics after her divorce, turning her need to create something with her hands into a second career that brought her more satisfaction than her first. Have you ever worked with clay before? She asked as I filled out the registration form. No, but I think it's time I learned. She smiled. Best reason to start anything. What made you decide on pottery? I thought about Robert's hands, always building something, always fixing what was broken. I thought about Barrett's hands, which had learned to take but never to make. I thought about my own hands, spent decades serving others, now ready to create something entirely for myself. I want to make something that will last, I said. Something beautiful that belongs only to me. The first class was the following Monday. I spent the weekend setting up my new house, arranging furniture and unpacking boxes with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. No photo albums full of Barrett's childhood pictures. No shrine to motherhood in every room. Just my things, arranged for my comfort, in spaces designed for my life. Sunday evening, as I sat in my new living room with a glass of wine and a book I'd chosen simply because it interested me, my phone rang with Barrett's number. This time, I answered. Mom. His voice was smaller than I remembered, uncertain in a way that made him sound like a child again. Please don't hang up. I waited. Sarah left me. I heard. She took everything, the furniture, the car, even the dog, she said. His voice broke slightly. She said I was weak for letting you destroy our future. Our future. Even now, even after everything, he couldn't see that the future he'd planned had been built on theft and manipulation. I'm sorry your marriage failed, Barrett. Are you? The question came out sharper than he'd intended. Because it feels like you got exactly what you wanted. I set down my wine glass and looked out at the Portland skyline, at the life I was building 3 states away from everything I'd once thought mattered. What I wanted was a son who respected me enough not to steal from me. What I wanted was a family that included me instead of plotting to erase me. What I wanted was to matter to the people I'd spent my life serving. You did matter. You do matter. No, Barrett, I was useful. There's a difference. Silence stretched between us, filled with all the conversations we'd never had, all the honesty we'd both avoided for years. I don't know how to fix this, he said finally. You can't fix it, I said gently. But you could try building something new, something honest, something that doesn't require taking from other people. I don't know how to do that. Then learn, the way your father learned to build that lake house, the way I'm learning to live without you. I hung up before he could respond, before his need could pull me back into the old pattern of sacrifice and service and disappointment. Outside my window, Portland was settling into evening, lights coming on in houses where people lived their own lives, made their own choices, built their own definitions of family and home and happiness. For the first time in 38 years, I was one of them. 5 months later, I was in my pottery studio when the doorbell rang. My hands were covered in clay, halfway through shaping what would become a serving bowl for the dinner party I was hosting next week. My first dinner party in the Portland house, with neighbors who'd become friends, people who knew me as Marian the Potter, not Marian the disappointed mother. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. I glanced at the clock on the studio wall. 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on my apron and made my way to the front door, already irritated by the interruption. Through the frosted glass, I could see a familiar silhouette that made my stomach clench with old, unwanted reflexes. Barrett stood on my front porch looking like he'd aged a decade in 6 months. His hair was unkempt, his clothes wrinkled, and his face had the hollow look of someone who'd been surviving on fast food and very little sleep. Behind him sat a beat-up Honda Civic I didn't recognize, loaded down with boxes and garbage bags like he was moving his entire life. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Hello, Barrett. Mom. His voice cracked on the word. I've been driving for 3 days looking for you. Mrs. Henderson finally told me you were in Portland. Helen shouldn't have done that. Please don't be angry with her. I told her it was an emergency. I studied his face. looking for signs of genuine crisis versus the manufactured urgency he'd used to manipulate me for years. He looked genuinely desperate, but that didn't necessarily mean anything had actually changed. What kind of emergency? He gestured vaguely at the car full of his possessions. I lost the house, lost my job, everything just... He swallowed hard. Everything fell apart after Sarah left. I'm sorry to hear that. Barrett blinked, clearly expecting more reaction. When none came, he stepped closer to the door. Mom, I was hoping. I need a place to stay. Just temporarily. Just until I can get back on my feet. There it was. The real reason for his cross-country pilgrimage. Not remorse, not genuine desire to repair our relationship, but need. Barrett needed something from me, so Barrett had come calling, just like always. I see. I know things ended badly between us. I know you're angry, but I'm still your son, and His voice broke again. I have nowhere else to go. I looked past him at the car full of his life's debris. Clothes and electronics and the detritus of a man who'd never learned to build anything lasting because he'd always assumed someone else would provide the foundation. Have you eaten today? He shook his head, relief flooding his features at what he interpreted as maternal concern breaking through. There's a diner 6 blocks down on Hawthorne. Decent food, reasonable prices. You should get something to eat and find a motel for the night. We can talk tomorrow. A motel? He stared at me like I'd suggested he sleep in a cardboard box. Mom, I can't afford a motel. I've got maybe $60 to my name. Then you should be more careful how you spend it. I started to close the door, but Barrett caught it with his hand. Wait, please. Just let me come inside. Let me explain what happened. Once you understand... I understand perfectly, Barrett. Your wife left you because you weren't useful to her anymore. Your employer fired you because you weren't reliable. Your creditors foreclosed on your house because you couldn't manage your finances. And now you're here because you think I'll rescue you from the consequences of your own choices. He flinched like I'd struck him. That's not. It's more complicated than that. Is it? I removed his hand from my door and stepped back. Tell me, Barrett, what exactly did you think would happen when you showed up here? Did you imagine I'd take one look at you and forget everything that happened at the lake house? Did you think I'd invite you to move into my spare bedroom and go back to taking care of you like you're still a child? I thought. He swallowed hard. I thought you'd forgive me. I'm your son. That's what mothers do. The audacity of it took my breath away. After everything he'd done, everything he'd put me through, he still believed he was entitled to my forgiveness simply by virtue of existing. Forgiveness isn't the same thing as enabling, Barrett, and being your mother doesn't mean I have to rescue you from every mess you create. But you did it before. You did. When Dad died, when I couldn't find work right after college, when Sarah and I were having problems. Yes, I did. And look what it taught you. That there would always be someone to clean up your mistakes. That you never had to face real consequences because Mom would always be there with an open checkbook and an open door. Barrett's face crumpled. I'm not asking for money. I'm just asking for a place to stay. A place to stay while you figure out how to rebuild your life using my resources. A place to stay while you eat my food, use my utilities, and slowly take over my space the way you took over the lake house. I wouldn't do that. You've already started. I gestured toward his car. You brought your entire life here without asking if you were welcome. You assumed I'd take you in because you assumed I'm still the same woman who spent 38 years prioritizing your needs over my own happiness. Barrett stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to form words that wouldn't come. Finally, he found his voice. What happened to you? I grew up. I realized that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. I learned the difference between being a good mother and being a doormat. You sound like Sarah. The comparison hung in the air between us, meant to wound. Barrett still believed that calling me selfish, comparing me to the woman who'd manipulated him, would make me back down and return to my old patterns of guilt and accommodation. Instead, I laughed. Good. Sarah may have been a terrible wife and a worse person, but she understood something I took 62 years to learn. She understood that you don't owe other people your life just because they share your DNA. Barrett took a step backward, genuine shock replacing his calculated desperation. I can't believe you're saying this. Then you haven't been listening for the past 40 years. I started to close the door again, but Barrett's voice stopped me. What am I supposed to do? For the first time since he'd arrived, I heard something genuine in his voice. Not manipulation, not entitlement, but actual fear. The fear of a man who'd finally run out of people to use and places to hide. I softened my tone, though I didn't change my position. You're supposed to figure it out, Barrett, the way adults do. Get a job, any job. Find a room you can afford. Start building a life based on what you can earn instead of what you can take from other people. I don't know how to do that. Then learn. The same way I learned how to live without your father. The same way I learned how to live without you. Barrett stood there for a long moment, staring at me like he was trying to reconcile the mother he'd always known with the woman standing in front of him. The mother who'd always given in, always found a way to help, always put his needs first. That mother was gone, and we both knew it. If I do that, he said quietly, if I figure out how to build something on my own, would you? Could we ever? Have a relationship again? He nodded, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time since he'd arrived. I considered the question, really considered it. Not the automatic yes I would have given 6 months ago, but an honest assessment of what it would take for me to trust my son again. Maybe, I said finally, if you can prove that you've changed, if you can build something real without taking from other people, if you can show me that you understand what respect actually means. How long would that take? However long it takes. Maybe a year, maybe 5 years, maybe never. That's not up to me, Barrett. That's up to you. He stared at me for another moment, then looked back at his car, at the chaos of his collapsed life waiting for him. I love you, Mom. I love you too, I said, and meant it. But love isn't enough anymore. It has to be earned. Barrett nodded slowly, like he was finally beginning to understand the difference. He turned and walked back to his car, his shoulders slumped with the weight of actual responsibility. As he drove away, I caught a glimpse of his face in the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, Barrett looked like a man instead of a boy. Scared, uncertain, but finally forced to confront the real world without a safety net. I watched until his taillights disappeared around the corner, then went back inside to my pottery studio. My serving bowl was still waiting on the wheel, half finished but full of potential. I settled back onto my stool, wet my hands, and began to shape the clay again. Tomorrow, I would host my first dinner party for friends who chose to spend time with me because they enjoyed my company, not because they needed something from me. Next week, I would start an advanced pottery class where I'd learn new techniques for creating things that had never existed before. And someday, maybe Barrett would knock on my door again, not as a desperate man seeking rescue, but as someone who'd learned to build his own life, who could offer something to our relationship instead of just taking from it. Until then, I had my own life to live, my own dreams to pursue, my own clay to shape into something beautiful and lasting and entirely mine. Outside my studio window, Portland sparkled in the late afternoon light, a city full of people who'd learned to start over, to rebuild, to create something new from the pieces of whatever they'd left behind. I was one of them now. Finally, completely, beautifully one of them. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.